The most unpopular war maybe ever in American history. The administration can't get on the same page about why we're in it, how long we'll be in it, or how to define the end. And as my dad likes to say, these people would lie when the truth would help. MAGA infighting continues, and this war is exacerbating it. You hate to see the MAGA infighting. We, of course, must discuss it. If we have time, we'll get to the latest Epstein fallout. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54. Ravi is out again this week, but my guest co-host is a returning champion to the show, our friend Zach Wahls. Zach is a state senator in Iowa. He's a sixth-generation Iowan, an Eagle Scout, I think you still count as a new dad. I grabbed this bio off your website.
He turns 2 in like 2 weeks, so I think that counts.
Yeah, okay. And he is running to bring a new generation of leadership to the U.S. Senate. He's a Democratic candidate for the United States Senate in Iowa. Zach, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. We're excited. We just filed our nominating petitions to get on the ballot. We've had a ton of news since the last time we were on the show. Definitely look forward to getting into all of it here today.
Awesome. Okay, well, in less awesome stuff, let's start with this breaking news. The New York Times reported today that a preliminary report in the Defense Department says that the strike on the school in Iran, the girls' school that killed well over 100 little girls in Iran, was in fact a missile fired by us. We're going to play a clip of Donald Trump in just a moment here. Before I even do that, I have a very strong reaction to this. I'm sure we both do. What I'm curious about, Zach, this is the kind of thing that I want to matter quite a lot. Not because I'm trying to, get a political angle one way or the other, but because this is the kind of thing that I want Americans to care about when they vote, but I'm also realistic about it. And you're out on the campaign trail, and I'm just curious. I'm sure the war is coming up. Does something like this come up?
Yeah, I haven't gotten a direct question about this specific, atrocity, but it is certainly something that we are hearing about more and more. I certainly saw the images as they were first starting to emerge, and it wasn't at that time totally clear who was responsible. But you look at the loss of life, the fact that you're talking about, school girls who were, obviously not a military target, but I think unfortunate example of the collateral damage from conflicts like this, and an illustration of the human cost of what is obviously a reckless war that we have, as far as I can tell, not received a clear explanation for what our objectives are, timeline for trying to end the conflict, and a president who seems much more interested in, kind of these military adventures almost rather than actually advancing American interests in the region. And just on a human level, seeing those photos, it shook me for sure, and I'm sure it did for you as well.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I'm going to try not to go on too long because I want to key up this clip of what Trump said yesterday that I think is super relevant to this. But as a prelude to it, one thought I have is that, one of the things that is supposed to, as somebody who joined after 9/11 and served in the army in Afghanistan, I, it always felt like one of the things that might make America exceptional was our desire not to have this happen. Clearly, these things did sometimes happen, but our desire to do everything we could to avoid it is what made us feel like we were different than the people we were fighting. And when you combine the fact that Pete Hegseth has eliminated the office in the Pentagon, or near eliminated the office in the Pentagon, that does the research to work hard to avoid quote unquote collateral damage, to avoid civilian and innocent people being casualties in any military conflict, combined with his repeated rhetoric that's backed up by Trump about we're no longer fighting politically correct wars, which I think this is the kind of thing he means. He always talks about rules of engagement. We're taking the gloves off. And if this is the kind of thing he means, that makes me sick. And it takes us further and further away from, frankly, being the good guys. And with that said, what is even more disgusting is this is a preliminary report issued by the Pentagon, and it would be very hard to convince me that the president of the United States did not see this report 24 hours before he read about it in the New York Times. And with that being the case, let's look at what Trump said when asked about this yesterday.
President, You just suggested that Iran somehow got its hands on a tomahawk and bombed its own elementary school on the first day of the war. But you're the only person in your government saying this. Even your defense secretary wouldn't say that when he was asked, standing over your shoulder on your plane on Saturday. Why are you the only person saying this?
Because I just don't know enough about it. I think it's something that I was told is under investigation. But tomahawks are used by others, as you know. Numerous other nations have tomahawks. They buy them from us. But I will certainly, whatever the report shows, I'm willing to live with that report. Yeah.
I guarantee you that he'd already seen the report. And even if he hadn't, he knew what direction it was going because I'm sure they told him. And what's going to happen now is he's going to say, well, they had missile launchers near the school. There was a military installation near the school. Do you know who else puts schools near military installations all over the world or even on them? The United States of America, because people stationed on military installations have kids that go to school. And on top of that, that is the exact same kind of thing that we heard Netanyahu say about Gaza as he went way past the original mission. So I'm going to stop talking now because this makes me so mad. I'm going to let you talk.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's an illustration of how you have this administration is trying to signal this break from the past. We're not going to fight woke wars or politically correct wars or whatever, which is a way of saying that they're not going to comply with international law or basic ethics around military conflict, which is what Pete Hegseth is really saying. And not only is it just wrong morally, it jeopardizes Americans. I mean, again, if you start seeing this administration say that they're going to start having no rules of engagement, that they're not going to be intentional about their targeting, to your point about the office in the Pentagon that they're closing, you think about who's going to be in harm's way as a result of that. It is Americans. It is our allies. And again, when you talk about ceding the moral high ground, so much of, I think, American leadership historically since the end of the Second World War has been because of that commitment that we have to a higher set of ideals. That is why so many countries around the world have looked to our country for leadership, and watching this administration throw that away to, in this case, glibly, try to recategorize blame for a tragic incident, no matter, who's responsible. And it looks like it was potentially the U.S. And that's just, it is reckless. It is selfish. And again, I think at the end of the day, it is Americans who are going to be paying the price for this. Those rules of engagement don't just, dictate, I don't need to tell you this, obviously, what happens on the battlefield, but it is also a part of how we were able to make sure that, we are trying to minimize civilian deaths, and what's happened right now in Iran and what is continuing to happen, I think should shock the conscience of every single observer.
What you just said about the way it affects Americans in the future is so correct. And let's blow that context out a little bit because the modern version of this argument comes out of the fact that we were fighting an asymmetric war against basically an insurgent or non-nation state enemy for really 20 years. I mean, Saddam Hussein had a government and army that that was like a very small percentage of the war in Iraq, and then the Taliban had an army and had a government that was a very small percentage of the war in Afghanistan, particularly given how long those wars lasted. So the majority of this debate about rules of engagement has grown out of the fact that we've been fighting an enemy that didn't really have an incentive to abide by international laws of war. This is a conventional fight against a nation state. And the other nations of the world who are our adversaries and potentially our future opponents in the battlefield are watching this. And if you look at this from the United States point of view, it looks like an attack among many attacks that went badly, was targeted wrong, and all of that could be true, but that is not the context the rest of the world looks at it in. The rest of the world sees an attack that happened in the first hours of our launching a war that was a war of choice. And to the rest of the world, this looks like as if at Pearl Harbor, the Japanese had not just bombed the harbor, but had also bombed the schools, because this looks like something we did purposefully in the beginning of this attack. And that can change the future of warfare for the United States and for the rest of the world. And that is an awesome responsibility that we have.
100%. And especially, I mean, they're watching the words from Pete Hegseth very closely. They're seeing these interviews that he's doing. And I think that it illustrates the essentially kind of the betrayal of these values, these ideals that our nation is supposed to not only lead by example, but supposed to emulate for the rest of the world. And I think the fact that the president, the commander in chief, is out here trying to cast dispersions on this report or say that he hadn't seen it. I mean, come on, he's the commander in chief. It is literally his job to know what is happening, in a situation like this one. And so I don't buy it for a second. I'm sure that we're going to continue to learn more in the coming days and weeks. We should continue to learn more in the coming days and weeks. And I think that it's definitely a very dark sign of what's currently happening and what's ahead.
Meanwhile, they can't seem to decide how long this is going to take because they can't, as you pointed out, decide what the objectives are. So, Jeremy, let's look at this compilation clip from CNN of them talking about how long this is going to be.
This is not Iraq. This is not endless.
We're already substantially ahead of our time projections.
I don't know how long it'll take. We have objectives. We will do this as long as it takes to achieve those objectives.
The achievable objectives of Operation Epic Fury we expect to last about 4 to 6 weeks.
This is only just the beginning.
We've already won in many ways, but we haven't won enough. As we're achieving major strides toward completing our military objective. And some people could say they're pretty well complete. Could call it a tremendous success right now as we leave here. I could call it, or we could go further, and we're going to go further.
You said it would be over soon. Are you thinking this week it will be over?
No,
Are you talking
but soon.
about days?
I think soon.
Okay.
This is not endless nation building.
Yeah, so they have no idea because they don't really know what they're after, which we'll get to in a moment. Zach, I'm going to let you react to that because given the subject that we're talking about, I feel bad that I invited you to co-host, and I think that in the next couple minutes I'm about to monopolize a lot of the talking. But go ahead, man.
Well, look, I mean, so here in Iowa, the conflict hit home really fast right out of the gate. Two of the first fatalities, Sergeant Declan Cody and Major Jeffrey O'Brien, both from Iowa, were among the early fatalities in the conflict. And the fact that the Congress has refused to step in through the War Powers Act, at the very least, you would think that you'd be able to get a vote on making sure that there are no American boots on the ground. It wasn't in the clips that you just aired there, but they're already kind of hemming and hawing about that prospect as well. And I think from my perspective, we've been traveling. We went to 66 of Iowa's 99 counties. We had our 250th campaign event last night. There's not a single person. We met over 10,000 Iowans over the course of this campaign, Democrats, independents, Republicans, not a single person who said, what we really need right now is another endless war in the Middle East. We need to bomb Iran more. That's not what people here in this state think should be this country's top priority or the focal point of our government. People here are really worried about the costs in our economy, the impact of Trump's tariffs, the Medicaid cuts that are devastating rural hospitals and clinics across Iowa, our state's water quality. I mean, there's so many things that people are so worried about. And now, as a consequence of this conflict, price of gasoline spiking, price of diesel spiking. Planting season is about a month and a bit away here in the state, and like half of the world's fertilizer moves through the Strait of Hormuz, and so a lot of farmers have already purchased their fertilizer for this season, but a lot of folks are going to be watching that very carefully because of the ripple effects it's going to have through the rest of our economy. And so I think there's tremendous concern that's out there. We're hearing that from people already, and I don't think that the objectives, being unclear, the timeline being unclear, the scope of involvement being unclear. I saw in some interview, I think this was earlier this week, Carolyn Leavitt refused to rule out the possibility of a draft. I mean, the fact that they're refusing to set clear boundaries around where they see this going, and they're just kind of, reeling from one interview to the next it is a perfect illustration of how this administration has been operating from the beginning. I don't think this would be happening if you had a Jim Mattis at this, at the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense. Pete Hegseth, never should have been confirmed in the first place, and if he had any honor at all, he would have resigned a long time ago. But that's a whole separate conversation.
No, you're totally right. When you watch, even look, the four-star General Kane, who was chosen as chair of the Joint Chiefs, I have to approach him with a little bit of skepticism just because he was down for doing that job for Trump in a second term. But even when you compare him and the way he approaches a briefing to the TV, talking head approach that the Secretary of Defense, who calls himself Secretary of War, takes, one of them seems at least somewhat like a normal military leader giving actual facts and briefing and trying to deal with the situation on the ground. And then you have Hegseth talking about fire and fury and death, like he's just trying to keep you from changing the channel at commercial. And it elevates things, it escalates things badly. You mentioned the Iowans who have been killed. They were reservists who was it in Kuwait, I believe.
Their Iowans were killed in Syria, and then in Kuwait was the most recent one. Yeah.
Yeah. And, these folks are the victims of, many of them, I think, are of drone attacks, which is a really important thing for us to talk about here. And that is where
actually, Jason, I mean, that's a really important point. I was reading this again. This is, I have not seen this finally confirmed, but it was specifically that there was not adequate protection prepared for the expected retaliation from the Iranian regime. And that is, again, the perfect distillation or example of an administration that was not thinking through, what the reaction would be from Iran, not preparing for the reaction, not able to shelter and build up our own defenses in anticipation of what was the obvious thing that they would do. And you just mentioned the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of War point. That is such a perfect example too. On the one hand, trying to rename this is the Department of War. I'm the Secretary of War now, but is this a war with Iran? Oh, no. It's a limited military engagement. It's not a war. It's not, we don't need to call it a war. That's not what this is. And they almost can't figure out what they actually want their own posture to be, right? Are we going to go out and, no rules of engagement, we're the Secretary of War, what have you. Or are we now trying to realize, oh no, we're scaling it back. This isn't actually a real war. This is, limited, military engagement. And I think it just illustrates the, how irresponsible this whole thing is. And especially in a time like this, you need to be able to trust that what is being communicated to the American public, especially when so many of the facts around this are not clear at all. And unfortunately, they're making it, I think, virtually impossible for people to trust what's coming from leaders at the very top of our government.
Well, let me pick up for a moment on your point about the protections that are in place for American service members over there. And let me nerd out a little bit on my experience over there. They knew that we might attack Iran. They knew it well before anybody else because they were already planning it. In August of last year, Vladimir Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, said to President Trump, said to Secretary Hegseth, he said, hey, we have a lot of intelligence that we have gained about how to counter the drone threat, because anybody who has followed the evolution of warfare, at least since the breakout of the war in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, has seen that drone warfare has become an enormous element of the way war is being fought right now. And for people who need to understand a real basic idea of what these drones are, they're just flying IEDs, right? The evolution that we experienced when we were over there was, at first it was bombs placed in the ground. Actually, what it was at first was suicide bombers, so IEDs worn by humans. Then there was bombs placed in the ground, which is really where the term IED came from, improvised explosive device. And then there was VBIDs, vehicle-borne IEDs, or car bombs. This is the next evolution of that, and it's been going on for 2 years. And it's just a remote control IED that you fly into somewhere, and that is where a lot of the warfare is happening in Ukraine. Now, I'm sure our military leadership was aware of that, but Zelensky said to the administration, I have a lot of intel about this. You have a lot of bases in the Middle East, and Iran is getting intelligence from Russia on how to conduct this warfare effectively. We want to give you intelligence. This was last August. We want to give you intelligence about how to defend against this threat. And we apparently didn't listen to it because our leaders have such big egos that they would rather just criticize Zelensky for not wearing a suit and apparently not saying thank you enough. And so now we find ourselves in a position of, after the fact, asking them for help. But yes, I do believe that the HESCO barriers that we used when I was over there are probably all that was still out in front of our bases in the Middle East, which is just basically huge concrete installations to stop people from being able to walk up or drive up with a bomb, but they don't have roofs over them. And so we passed up that opportunity. And this is so maddening because if you go back over 20 years, what you see is that when after 9/11, when we first went into Afghanistan and when we first went into Iraq, the IED threat was evolving, and the vehicles we went in with didn't have the proper armor on them. And people were sending armor over to their relatives. People were up armoring things by grabbing stuff and trying to drill them onto the sides of Humvees. And Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense at that time, said, well, you go to war with the army you have, not the army you want. And it was inexcusable at the time. But compared to this, it's nothing compared to this, because we knew what war we might be going into. And at least in those situations, you actually had the enemy there looking at you when they were blowing these things. They had to be near you. The Iowans who were killed were reservists who were there on logistics duty, not anywhere near the front. And they were killed because this administration was too proud to accept intelligence from somebody that they looked at as their little brother at best. And that is totally unforgivable.
100%.
Speaking of which, let's go to this clip of Carolyn Levitt talking about how many troops have been injured, and we don't know how many of whom may have been from these drone attacks.
Questions for you today. Alex.
Thank you. Reuters has reported that about 150 U.S. service members have been injured so far. Can you confirm that number and elaborate on that?
I can't confirm the exact number. I know it's within that ballpark, but I would defer you to the Pentagon for a specific number of wounded or injured thus far.
All right, so we don't know how many of these folks that have been injured by drones, which would mean a lot of them may have been preventable. All right, we're going to go to break, but when we come back from break, we're going to talk about the latest evolution in what this war seems to be about. When we come back, we'll run through all of the evolution of that, and then we'll get into talking about what has basically become a war about oil. ED is more common than you think and simpler to treat than ever. Through HIMS, you can connect online with a licensed provider to access personalized treatment options discreetly and on your own terms. Through HIMS, you can access personalized prescription treatment options for ED if prescribed. HIMS offers access to ED treatment options ranging from personalized products to trusted generics that cost 95% less than brand names if prescribed. You shouldn't have to go out of your way to feel like yourself. HIMS brings expert care straight to you with 100% online access to personalized treatments that put your goals first. This isn't one-size-fits-all care that forgets you in the waiting room. It's your health and goals put first, with real medical providers making sure you get what you need to get results. Think of HIMS as your digital front door that gets you back to your old self, with simple 100% online access to trusted treatments for ED and more, all in one place. To get simple online access to personalized, affordable care for ED, hair loss, weight loss, and more, visit hims.com/majority. That's hims.com/majority for your free online visit. hims.com/majority. Featured products include compounded drug products, which the FDA does not approve or verify for safety, effectiveness, or quality. Prescription required. See website for details, restrictions, and important safety information. Actual price will depend on product and subscription plan.
Look, magnesium is something most of us lack, and if you're taking the drugstore variant, you're still not getting the full picture. In industrial farming, chronic stress, and everyday aging all make it worse. Almost every supplement uses one form of magnesium, but magnesium comes in many forms, and each form helps your health in a different way. That's exactly why you need to try Qualia Magnesium Plus. Most people know that magnesium is critical for sleep, but some forms help muscle recovery, brain function, heart health, bone health, mood, and over 300 functions in the body. That's why Qualia Magnesium Plus is the only product to combine 10 bioavailable forms of magnesium with more than 70 trace minerals that help fuel magnesium support. It's full spectrum magnesium to deliver magnesium's full potential. Full body benefits include sleep deeper, think sharper, recover faster, support muscle strength, steadier mood and stress response, better energy and metabolism. And it's not just a sleep supplement. It's a full body magnesium system built for modern living to feel your best every day. And it's time to improve your sleep and enhance your recovery with Qualia Magnesium Plus. That's Qualia Magnesium Plus, and it's helped me a ton in my life, and I know it's going to help you a ton too. So experience the most trusted magnesium for purity, potency, and performance. Plus, it's non-GMO for those who are looking for that, vegan and gluten-free, making it a choice you can feel good about. Go to qualia.com/majority for 50% off. And here's a bonus. Use the code MAJORITY for an additional 15% off your order. That's QUALIA life.com/majority. Use the code MAJORITY. Thanks to Qualia for sponsoring this episode.
Okay, it seems like the latest statements about why we're in this thing have to do with oil, but there was a detour before we got there having to do with regime change. It started with their nuclear capability and their missile capability and their ability to threaten our bases in the Middle East, which there was no indication that they were going to do if we hadn't attacked them. But and apparently we had completely neutralized months ago their nuclear threat. But so that quickly was dispensed with, all of that. And then they started talking about regime change. Now, never mind that the only way we've changed the regime so far in any really significant way is that we've gotten the Supreme Leader's son, who is more of a hardliner and younger obviously than his father. But this regime change thing they keep talking about, they're ignoring the difficulty of actually changing a regime solely with an air and sea campaign, as in it's pretty much never happened, which is why I was not surprised to hear these occasional references to ground troops. And let's play this most recent clip from Senator Blumenthal coming out of a briefing from the administration about the war.
I emerged from this briefing as dissatisfied and angry, frankly, as I have from any past briefing in my 15 years in the Senate. I am left with more questions than answers, especially about the cost of the war. My questions have been unanswered, and I will demand answers because the American people deserve to know. And I guess I am most concerned about the threat to American lives of potentially deploying our sons and daughters on the ground in Iran. We seem to be on a path toward deploying American troops on the ground in Iran to accomplish any of the potential objectives here. And there is also, as disturbingly as anything else, the specter of active Russian aid to Iran, putting in danger American lives. Literally, Russia seems to be aiding our enemy actively and intensively with intelligence and perhaps with other means. And China also may be assisting Iran. So the American people deserve to know much more than this administration has told them about the cost of the war, the danger to our sons and daughters in uniform, and the potential for further escalation and widening of this war, a war of choice made by this president, not chosen by the American people, with potentially huge consequences to American lives.
In a moment, I will get into why I think that they're heading toward potentially putting troops on the ground. But Zach, first, you're talking to people all the time out there on the campaign trail. This has already started out as one of the most unpopular wars, if not the most unpopular at the beginning in American history. I think the poll had it at 41% approval. World War II was 97. The Afghanistan war was 93. Even the Iraq war was 76%. And those were all wars where we were, from the beginning, putting American troops on the ground. If we were to escalate to that level, what would be the reaction in Iowa, for instance?
Well, I mean, again, people here already speaking out about how much anger there is about the early loss of life. We are seeing that ripple through the rest of our state when it comes to impacts on the economy. And again, I think the fundamental thing is that people here have so many other things that we are concerned about, concerns that we hear about on the campaign trail for U.S. Senate. at all of the events that we do. And I will tell you that I have yet to meet somebody who thinks that starting another endless war in the Middle East is the right thing that we should be doing. I think another thing that's really frustrating to me is that we had a deal that had been negotiated by the Obama administration with our allies, with other regional partners, that was pursuing a diplomatic solution to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, which would be incredibly destabilizing in that region. And it was the first Trump administration that ripped that deal up, exited it unilaterally, and put us onto the course that brought us to where we are today. And to the point that you made about the regime change, I was reading over the weekend about how one of the more kind of pragmatic potential alternatives to Khamenei's son, was killed in an American strike during one of the meetings of Iranian leadership after the beginning of the conflict. And again, it's just another example of how this administration is not, actually being clear about their objectives, pursuing them in a way that actually makes it likely to obtain or achieve those objectives and actually obtain long-term peace and security in the region. And I cannot imagine Americans wanting to continue to pay the price of this war, given the current trajectory that we're on.
Absolutely. I firmly believe that Donald Trump thought that what was going to happen was we were going to hammer them from the air. We were going to seriously degrade, if not obliterate, their navy, and they were just going to turn around and say, "Hey, Uncle, you got us. Who do you want us to put in charge?" Because and because he thought he could do what he did in Venezuela, which is turn the vice president into the president and then get access to the oil, which looking back seems to be mostly what that was about. And he thought that was going to happen in Iran, which is a horrible misunderstanding of the regime. And by the way, of the fact that the army there is part of the regime. It is invested in it. It's not, I mean, this is not a transactional group of people that you're dealing with. And that brings me to, I bet, the conclusion that Blumenthal is reaching there, which is that if they are serious about either regime change or a change in the regime's position with regard to oil, which we're about to get into, you're going to have to actually have regime change. And you're not going to get that in a country like Iran by just controlling the air, which I'm sure we do at this point, or controlling the sea, which we don't quite do, but which we could eventually get to. But that doesn't get it done because they have an army. And as a former soldier, I can tell you, you can't change the governance on the ground if you don't hold the ground. And I don't think we should do that. But I think we should all be clear-eyed about the idea that if that's what the administration actually aims to do, there's not a way to get there from here without putting American troops on the ground. Which brings me to why it is such an outrage that this does seem to be about oil. Now we've got, I mean, which is like where we really get down to what this may have been about all along, right? While we have, on the one hand, Russia actively aiding our enemy in killing more Americans, we are talking about easing oil sanctions on Russia in order to bring down prices on oil in the United States because of the way that this war has spiked those prices. Meanwhile, you've got members of Trump's administration incorrectly stating that tankers are moving through the Hormuz or through the Strait, right? When that was not happening, which then brings oil prices down, and then they go back up when it turns out that the energy secretary was either wrong or was purposefully manipulating that information. And then we kind of get to the meat of it, why we're really here, when we see what Trump actually, what he put out, what he tweeted out on Truth Social, or however you're supposed to say that. He said, if Iran does anything that stops the flow of oil within the Strait of Hormuz, they will be hit by the United States of America 20 times harder than they have been hit thus far. Additionally, we will take out easily destroyable targets that will make it virtually impossible for Iran to ever be built back as a nation again. I mean, for a guy, I'm going to keep reading here in a second, but for a guy who's talked a lot about the protesters and the idea that this is some sort of moral calling that we go to this war, but if you mess with the price of our gas, we're going to make it so that you can never build your country back. He goes on to say, death, fire, and fury will rain upon them, but I hope and pray that that does not happen. This is a gift from the United States of America to China and all of those nations that heavily use the Hormuz Strait. Now he's trying to talk to the rest of the world and say, quit trying to use this as a proxy fight against us, because it's going to affect you too. Hopefully, it is a gesture that will be greatly appreciated. The regular Trump sign off. Does it seem to you like this is a war about oil?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the thing to me that really jumps out is that, they're out requesting is another 50 billion from Congress, right?
Mhm.
Trying to say that we don't have money for healthcare, we don't have money for hungry kids, we don't have money to invest in our people, but we've got money to go to war with Iran for more oil. And to me, I think as a perfect illustration, frankly, of like what Donald Trump said he was running against. I mean, it is so surreal now to see all these clips of JD Vance and Trump and others, during the 2024 campaign saying, if you vote for Kamala Harris, you're voting for a war with Iran. And now here we are, right? And again, you talk about when he put out a message like this, he's trying to communicate to, other countries in the world, but has completely destroyed American credibility. And I think that if you're talking about, what is the actual end goal here, I think that, I mean, again, it feels like if there is a clear goal, it has not been clearly communicated to the American people. To your point about the Iranian nuclear capabilities, we were told that they had been completely destroyed last year. That was obviously false. Trump said in the opening hours of the strikes that, the Iranian people should rise up and take to the streets to depose the regime. The Iranian people were in the streets the next day, but they were chanting death to America. And if supporting regime change was what this was supposed to be about, they thought it was going to be Venezuela Part 2. As you said, they badly misread the situation. They didn't understand the government. They didn't understand what was happening with the protests on the ground. And I certainly would agree with the assessment that the idea that you're going to have regime change without boots on the ground seems farcical at best.
And let's be realistic about what boots on the ground would mean. I mean, this this is a real army. They have
Absolutely.
this is a real army that if we were to invade, then militarily, I think we would probably be, and I'm going to put this in quotes, victorious, because what the hell is a victory? Uh, I suppose we would, and I suppose we'd probably find ourselves, it might take years, but we'd find ourselves in a position to, elevate like the son of the former Shah or whoever the dude in waiting is. But then we're going to be locked in an insurgency campaign, just like we were in Iraq, probably worse. It's going to be like a combination of the two because Iran is so much bigger. The terrain is both like Iraq in some places, and then like Afghanistan and other places. It's, right between the two, basically. So you're going to have an external sanctuary for the insurgency to exist from. You're going to have infighting, even in the people who wanted regime change. You've got more than one faction that thinks that they should be in charge of it. And so then Trump and others have suggested that there are other countries in the region that would handle that would be the transition force. And that is ludicrous to me. Let's go through the candidates for that. Is Israel going to occupy a Muslim nation that is its neighbor? And will that go over well? I do not think it will. And I do not think that they would have any interest in trying. Are some of these Gulf states going to send in peacekeeping forces? One, if they do, they're not exactly the most seasoned combat forces. They're going to get beat up. And two, they're not going to, because those are almost all Sunni nations, and they're going to be fighting against an entirely Shia insurgency. That's not going to play. If anybody is going to go in and hold this ground and change this regime, it will be the United States, and it will be a humongous miscalculation.
Yeah. I mean, again, and this is I think another illustration. They have not actually thought this all the way through to the end. You don't want to start a conflict when you have not actually thought through how you're going to get to where you're trying to go. And that is exactly what this administration has done. And I can't reiterate this point enough, Jason. This is not a war that the American people support, not a war that the American people wanted to see us launch. There are so many challenges that are facing our country right now, and this is making so many of those problems worse, not better. And I cannot believe that there are very many Americans, unless they are in that kind of diehard MAGA worldview, who think that spending tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars in the Middle East, when this administration is trying to convince us that there isn't money for healthcare, that there isn't money to invest in clean energy, that there isn't money to invest in feeding hungry school kids across our country, that this is the right thing to do. And so I think that, as we see this continue to play out in the coming days, weeks, months, hopefully not years, this support for the war, you said is 40%, probably the high watermark, if I had to guess. I do not see this getting more popular over time. If anything, I see it exactly the opposite.
Yeah, I think that's the ground truth. And imagine being this detached from reality, that folks who are having to shill for this, the way they sound, like, for instance, this Fox News clip comparing this to World War II. It's coming. I jumped ahead in the outline for Jeremy. He's going to get it. Jeremy, give me the Fox News clip talking about Okinawa.
We were reminded earlier today that if you turn the clock back to World War II, the battle for Okinawa, one island, 470 square miles, took 86 days and 250,000 casualties. So for gas prices to go up a little bit is suddenly raising so much concern. I mean, think of how much worse it was in World War II than what we're facing now.
I just like to point out that the dude saying that is an anchor on Fox who probably lives in New York and takes the subway to work. This dude hasn't paid for gas in a while. They're so out of touch. And the idea that we're going to send Americans to die, or frankly, and we don't talk about this enough, or take the lives of other human beings, innocent or otherwise, and we've killed both in this war, so that our gas isn't as expensive, can in any way be compared to trying to fight for the survival of our civilization by the greatest generation? He's not in the 40. I guess that's some segment of the 40% that supports this.
Just completely detached from reality. I mean, the comparison is offensive, incorrect on so many levels. And I think the thing, again, to me, that is just so horrifying about the situation is you have people, like the person we just saw, trying to justify it on grounds that are totally indefensible. You have an administration that is trying to, continue to litigate this conflict without again, clear plan for what is in the future, what success looks like, or how to safeguard American lives or the lives of anyone else in the region. And I think that's another piece to your point earlier about, kind of the cascading effects throughout the region. You're seeing Shia populations in other states take to the streets, protesting, destabilizing other countries. This is very much a situation where they've lit the match on something and they don't totally understand, where this conflagration is going to wind up burning.
Yep. All right. We're going to take one more break. And when we come back, we're going to finish up by talking about the infighting sort of in the MAGA influencer world. Starting something new isn't just hard, it's terrifying. So much work goes into this thing that you're not entirely sure will work out, and it can be hard to make that leap of faith. Trust me, I know. When I started this podcast, I wasn't even sure what I was doing. What if nobody listens? What if I make a fool of myself? What if nobody buys these products? Now I know that I was right in believing in myself and launching the podcast despite all the fears and the hesitations. It also helps when you have a partner like Shopify on your side. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Heinz and Mattel to brands that are just getting started. Get started with your own design studio. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. Best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. And what if I get stuck? Shopify is always around to share advice with their award-winning 24/7 customer support. It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/majority. Go to shopify.com/majority. That's shopify.com/majority. If you've got culinary taste, you know how expensive exploring your local food scene can get, or how hard it is to find the time and energy to try somewhere new. Cook Unity is the first chef-to-you service delivering locally sourced meals from award-winning chefs right to your door every week, and it's cheaper than other delivery options. Go to cookunity.com/majority54 or enter code majority54 before checkout for 50% off your first week. My personal favorite has been the truffled fettuccine Alfredo with grilled chicken and Parmesan cheese by Chef Mina Srinivas. You can seriously taste the freshness of these ingredients, and I was left in awe with just how good it was and how satisfied I felt after eating. I really love the variety Cook Unity has to offer. This way I never get bored with my meals. Choose from a rotating seasonal menu of over 300 meals, or let Cook Unity's platform provide personalized recommendations. There are over 25 plus diets and cuisines, so you can always match your cravings with your wellness goals. In select cities, your meal delivery will come in an insulated bag that they'll pick up for you as part of their eco-friendly reusable bag program. Cook Unity also has commitment-free subscriptions that start as low as $11 per meal. Skip deliveries, pause, or cancel anytime. Experience chef-quality meals every week delivered right to your door. Go to cookunity.com/majority54 or enter code majority54 before checkout for 50% off your first week. That's 50% off your first week by using code majority54 or going to cookunity.com/majority54. Okay, this war has been one more thing that has exacerbated the rift in the MAGA influencer world, which Ravi and I have been following for a while because, not just because like Schadenfreude, it's fun to watch or something, but because it percolates to the top and more than any other administration I've ever seen, rifts in the base majorly affect shifts in strategy. Because usually what happens is it's like, hey, the base is fighting, but we got to govern the whole country. And that ain't how these people work. So let's look at some of these latest disagreements. Here, let's start with this Jimmy Dore and Owen Schroyer clip, Jeremy.
You got some of the biggest names on the right or in the MAGA universe completely going against and calling out Donald Trump. What is there anything left to MAGA? And what does this mean for the midterms, right?
I guess the only thing left of MAGA is what we call cuck-servatives and neocons is I would say what's left. And it really has become a cult. It really has. It goes back to what I said. They used to have to print lies about Trump. Now they just print the truth. It has become a cult. And the names that you just mentioned, we might have different approaches to politics and different policies, but I think the one thing that remains is consistency. We remain consistent on the things that we think, the things that we say. And that's why we're so upset with the direction of where this Trump administration is going.
Now, there's a primary on the other side of your race, isn't there? Or is there not? I can't remember.
Not really. I mean, Ashley Hinson is almost certainly going to be the Republican nominee. There was some tussling between her and Republican state senator about who was the true heir to MAGA, but then Trump endorsed Hinson on the third day of her campaign. And, it's funny about Hinson, when she first got into the race, this is back in September of last year, I was saying, because not everybody knows who Ashley Hinson is. She doesn't have a huge national profile. It's the short version, she's kind of like the Marjorie Taylor Greene of the Midwest. But now Marjorie Taylor Greene looks reasonable compared to Ashley Hinson and actually has, some kind of, convictions, like the Jimmy, whichever one of it was that was talking
Yeah, I don't
about.
know which one is which either.
Yeah, but it is, I think, astounding to me even that you see the complete abandonment of the things, again, that you saw those clips of JD Vance and Trump campaigning on in 2024. If you vote for Kamala Harris, it's a vote for endless wars and going to war with Iran. And now, look around, folks, it's here. And so I think that, those fissures, as you said, that are emerging in the MAGA base they're very real. And I think it is going to create profound consequences for them and real challenges for them in the general election here in November.
I also think that they've created a monster here because they fan the flames of this MAGA influencer world because it helped them get elected again in 2024. But then that influencer world became extremely powerful and ended up with its own constituency and knows that constituency has to outlast the Trump administration. And it's become in their interest to start laying the seeds for something it's almost like, oh, you're into that band that we were all into when we met and how we became friends. Oh, you're still doing that? I'm not into that anymore. I'm into the new thing.
Yeah, I mean, like the Epstein files, I mean, it was one of the core animating ideas, right? I mean, to the extent that it was made up of ideas, of trying to reject the neocon, adventurism of the 2000s and to some extent into the 2010s. the Epstein files, which were this, kind of moral clarion call of there's this global elite and all of these things. And then so to have this administration, basically trying to sweep the Epstein files under the rug until Congress took, overdue action, was threatening basically to force them to be released. And even now, they're not being released in the way that a lot of people believe is consistent with the law that was put forward. And even, a lot of people who are saying that they think that there's a connection between the timing of the launching of this action in the Middle East and the fact that they're trying to distract from. I literally had a neighbor of mine, a veteran, text me. He's like, kind of interesting timing how these things played out the way they did. And look, I think that, again, this was an extension of things that started many months ago, going back to August, or you could even say going back almost a decade to this administration's decision to tear up the Iran deal that the Obama administration negotiated. But I do think that these fissures are very real. They cut to the core of some of the most strongly held beliefs that animated a lot of these influencers that they talked about on their shows and their podcasts and at their conferences or conventions or whatever. And now you're seeing that spill over here into these clips that we're playing.
There's a concept called reflective power, and this idea that if you can attack somebody who is more powerful than you and get away with it, then you gain power as a result. And that we're starting to see that happen with Trump from the influencers in his base. And the way that used to work is because Trump was deemed less powerful before he was president or between presidencies, that attacking the left gave you that reflective power. Now you have to turn on your own side and you have to reflect the right in order to get that power. And some evidence of this is in this exchange between Lindsey Graham, or this reaction by Megyn Kelly to Lindsey Graham. But let's go first to the Lindsey Graham clip, and then we'll look at Megyn Kelly's response to it.
Finally, to my friends in Saudi Arabia, I've been your biggest champion. I think the Crown Prince has taken Saudi Arabia in a completely different direction in a good way. But here's what I want to say to Saudi Arabia tonight. I'm willing to do a mutual defense agreement with your country to give you protection in perpetuity. Under the agreement I've been pushing, and I hope we can continue to talk about, if you're attacked by Iran, we would go to war for you.
All right, now let's see what Megyn Kelly said about that.
No one elected you as our commander-in-chief. Shut the fuck up. Get off the national scene. You've disgraced yourself and endangered our troops long enough.
So I guess we take that to say that she thinks the war with Iran is a bad idea, or does she just think it's a bad idea if it's in defense of Saudi Arabia? I mean, either way,
Yeah,
I agree.
Look, first of all, I think it is another good illustration of this administration's inability to clearly communicate to its own base what we are actually trying to accomplish as a nation with this conflict, and the fact that they can't even get their own supporters, on the same page about what we're actually trying to do here is kind of part of what's driving this fissure. But again, so much of the core appeal that they were trying to really drive, both in Trump's, original nomination back in 2016, when he was coming back again in 2024, was this rejection of what the Republican Party had been pushing for almost a decade at that point, over a decade at that point. And to see that kind of fissure emerge is I think an illustration of where this is headed, because again, I don't see how they put this back together. And so I don't know if it's going to continue to dissolve further. And I also, it is, I think, important to be clear, like, we're not talking about people who are like mainstream commentators, right? The audience that these people have is real, and it shouldn't be understated, but it shouldn't be overstated either. But when you talk about, right, are these MAGA diehard voters who propelled Trump to victory in 2024 and 2016, are they going to stay home in November? It certainly seems like it to me.
Yeah, it seems like a good chunk of them will. Speaking of which, we'll do a quick, like, sort of flyover on the latest Epstein stuff, which is it has expanded into this ranch in New Mexico. We have this, tweet by Representative Melanie Stansbury talking about the New Mexico DOJ has begun investigating on the ground the Zorro Ranch, which was Epstein's ranch there, where apparently a lot of the survivors say they were taken, a lot of the victims were taken. And let's look at this video from Representative Stansbury.
Well, I am coming to you from New Mexico with a breaking update in the Epstein investigation, and that is today, New Mexico's Department of Justice has begun its on-site investigation of Zorro Ranch. This investigation is crucial as a part of our larger investigation into the crimes that happened by Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and his associates here in New Mexico, as part of New Mexico's investigation through our state Department of Justice and our newly passed bipartisan Truth Commission. Now, one of the things that's important to know is that New Mexico's Zorro Ranch is a place where multiple crimes were reported both to federal authorities as well as state and local authorities. In fact, there are records dating back to the mid-1990s of abuse happening at the ranch, including a report to the FBI in 1996 by a survivor and multiple other reports over the years. And one of the significant and important pieces of this case is to understand why justice was never pursued at the state, local, or federal level. So this investigation is a crucial piece of trying to understand what happened at the ranch, to look for potential crimes that may have occurred on the ranch property, especially because after Jeffrey Epstein was arrested in 2019 and other properties were searched, Zorro Ranch was never properly searched, and because it is a crucial piece in getting to the bottom of truth and accountability here in our state, to hold those who are still able to be held accountable to the law, as well as seeking justice and healing for survivors here in our state.
Okay, so I played that just to say, like, as much as they want it to be, clearly this Epstein scandal and investigation is not over. I did see a stat that said that since the war in Iran had started, there's been a 95% drop in Google searches having to do with the Epstein files, which doesn't surprise me and would certainly speak to buttress the point that your neighbor was making. Whether or not it was done exclusively to distract from the Epstein files is a different question. Whether it's a benefit that motivates Trump to keep it going, yes, I would say he's motivated to continue the war because as bad as the news is to be in a really unpopular war, it's not the news that was beginning to come out, 2 weeks ago about him and a 13-year-old girl. So, there's something to that.
Yeah, and look, again, I think that this was one of those kind of core issues that the MAGA influencer world had converged on. It was a big part of what they were talking to each other about in the lead up to 2024. And obviously, as you started to see more and more of those details emerge over time, you can certainly, I think, get, frankly, for me, an appreciation for why so many of those influencers were so fixated on what is in these documents. And, the administration now is, I think, very clearly complicit in a cover up, trying to, redact pieces of information that are unflattering for President Trump or his associates. And of course, there's certainly his own sordid history with Epstein and various people in his administration covering up for Epstein over the years. And I think that the ongoing disagreements, conversations that are happening in that universe are going to bleed out into the rest of the broader Trump coalition. A significant number of his voters in 2024 do identify as MAGA, right? Part of the MAGA movement. Certainly not all of them, but a significant number. Now, how many of those folks are watching those kinds of shows or podcasts or what have you on a regular basis? I don't feel like I have a clear sense, but what I can tell you is that, to the extent that those folks are diverging from the president, are not excited to vote for him or candidates he's supporting this November, that is going to have a really significant impact on the outcome of the elections here later this year.
All right. Well, now that we've gotten to the end of the actual newsy part of this, this is where Ravi and I usually talk about like one for us, like other things going on in life. You're campaigning, most of the time, but what, you could talk about that for a moment if you like. You could talk about anything. I'm going to talk about baseball in a second, but you go ahead. Whatever you want to talk about. Give an update.
Yeah, well, I'm more of a football guy than baseball, and there's been a lot of my Green Bay Packers have been very active here in the last couple of days. I haven't been able to stay on top of that. We're like 20 days away from the end of the first quarter, which is the quarterly deadlines are a huge part of what drives campaign fundraising. And so we've been pretty focused both on submitting our nominating petitions, which we were able to do this morning, and continuing to make sure that we have the resources to go up against Ashley Hinson. She's been one of the biggest recipients of corporate PAC money of any member of the U.S. House. And so she's been well funded in that regard. We're counting on individual people across our state and across the country. And if anyone who's listening to this show wants to learn more, then go to zachwahls.com. We got a ton of information on there about what's going on in the race and how to be supportive. But what I would tell you is that as we've been going all over Iowa, again, it's kind of this point that we've been making throughout the whole show. There are so many real, profound, serious challenges that are facing our state, our country. We see the impacts of the tariffs continuing to roil our state's agricultural economy, our manufacturing economy. Just last week, I was at the county next door, Iowa County, where Whirlpool announced more layoffs because of their kind of inability to turn a profit, in part because of what's happened in the economy with these tariffs being in place. This is a plant that its heyday, employed 3,000 people, down now to 1,000 with more layoffs coming later this year. The company has already said, like, when you talk about like what's the practical impact of increasing prices at the pump, the guy who works third shift, who has a 40-minute commute each way, guy who was just got a pink slip and now has to figure out how he's going to provide for his family while trying to deal with higher gas prices. So there are, again, real challenges that are facing people in the economy. There continues to be real serious concern about the corruption in DC. We haven't even really, I guess the Epstein stuff is kind of a part of that corruption, but this administration, Trump family enriched himself and his associates by billions of dollars, this cryptocurrency scam that they had when they took the White House last year. You look at the fact that they're more focused on bailing out countries like Argentina, which are actual competitors from Iowa's ag economy perspective, than they are with actually supporting, a new direction for our state. It's no surprise to me that people here are really fed up with the president, his approval rating. He won Iowa by 13 points in 2024. Latest poll I saw has his approval rating in Iowa at -10. So you're talking about like a 20-point plus swing against the president because of what's going on. And that's part of why I think that the fact that Ashley Hinson, my Republican opponent in this race, has chosen to embrace Donald Trump, so closely. I think it's going to be a huge liability for her in November because she's been a rubber stamp for an agenda that is really hurting our state. And again, you look at the continued divisions that are emerging within the MAGA folks who are left. We're going to be able to build a coalition. We already are. In fact, 15% of the signatures that we turned in this morning were from registered Republicans and independents. There are a lot of folks out there who are ready to make some change, or like we always say, to rotate the crops here in Iowa.
Yeah, I like that. Well, look, for folks who are interested in taking the Senate, it's going to take a large map to do that, and it's going to take doing things like winning in Iowa, which is entirely possible, particularly with you as a candidate. And so I would encourage people to support you to do that. On a lighter note, what I will say is, for people who, if you want to turn off all of this horrific news for a little bit and turn to something else that's truly joyful, I am an unpaid evangelist for the World Baseball Classic, which is the World Cup of Baseball, which happens every 4 years. It was 3 years ago this time because of COVID, but it's every 4 years, and it is the most incredible thing. Our family has been, watching a lot of the games, and you've got all these players who are like, you've got many of them are like the best major leaguers there are, playing for Team USA, playing for Japan like Otani, playing for the Dominican Republic. Puerto Rico has its own national team, which is really good. Team Mexico, and it's the best players playing not for money and playing not for their contract or for bonuses, but playing for their countries. And it's so joyous, and the crowds are like international soccer crowds. They have like fight songs. It's incredible. And actually, for those watching right now, tonight, Team Italy plays Team Mexico. And it's a whole thing where there's a three-way tie in their division between Mexico, Italy, and Team USA, which is like a super team that got upset by Italy last night, which, by the way, Team Italy is 5 guys from Italy and then a bunch of guys who actually play who are Americans whose like grandparents were from Italy and have very Italian names, and they're major leaguers. And so tonight, if Team Italy beats Team Mexico, Then Team USA advances into the quarterfinals. If Team Italy loses to Team Mexico, but Team Italy scores at least 5 runs, then the U.S. advances. But if they lose and don't score that many, anyway, it's really good stuff. And this is all a very long way of telling this audience that there will be no majority 54 next week, because Ravi will still be at pizza school in Europe, and I will be with my family in Miami at the semifinals and finals of the World Baseball Classic. So you're going to have to forgive us. We're going to take a week off, and then we'll be back the week after that. But Zach, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it. Good to see you, and good luck the rest of the way.
Thanks, Jason. Hope you have a great time with the baseball down in you said Miami.
Yeah, it'll be in Miami for. We went to the last one, and it was just, man, it was amazing. Like,
sounds awesome. Safe travels getting down there.
Thanks. All right, everybody. Please leave a 5-star review. You can find Zach. What's your social? Is it just at Zach Wahls?
Just at Zach Wahls. We're on pretty much every major platform except for Truth Social.
That's fair. All right. I'm at Jason Kander on everything. And yeah, I'm also not on Truth Social. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Mighty Mighty. Remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.